Hi, everybody. This is Alex Simmons here with my second episode of Simmons Says. Because I have things to say, not a lot of things sometimes only a few things. So these are the short things I have to say. Um, I spent earlier today viewing the latest James Bond movie with Daniel Craig, which is the third, and I think he has voiced a desire not to do a fourth, so he may not. So we'll see who the new one is. But in seeing it, and remembering way back in the day when I saw the first Bond film with Sean Connery, that and some other things that have been going on in my creative life have made me wonder what the heck is it that makes an iconic character last so long and work or not work through so many different mediums. And so I was thinking about that because as a writer, and even back in my earlier years as an actor, you get caught up in how to create these characters or a particular character or the thing that you're working on, and you're thinking of the elements that go into it. And the first time out the gate, all this stuff comes out of you, and you put it down on paper, and you work real hard to sort of lock it in and fine tune it, and then you put it out into the world and you hope it connects, and you hope it works. And especially if you're working on a character that's not yours, that someone else created. And then you do your best work and you hope it connects. You hope you knew enough about it. You did your homework. So I was thinking about this. I mean, some of the, more iconic, really iconic characters, just to name a few, would be, Bond. All right, let's look at James. Started, I believe, in the late 50s, early 60s as a series of novels written by Ian Fleming. And Fleming had actually, in his real life, been a spy for Her Majesty's services. I don't know if it was MI5 or MI6, but, he called on his life experiences and wrote these novels. Now, of course, realizing that he was not doing a biography, he was doing a fictional storyline and he was creating a hero, he created this Bond who may have had elements of himself, but also had a lot of other things going for him. And Fleming was known to admit that, where Bond succeeded in some of the stories that Fleming's wrote, Fleming himself, in a similar situation in real life, in his service for the king and queen and all that, had failed, hadn't done as well, hadn't succeeded. So, he made Bond a little bit bigger than life, but also he put a lot of elements in there that made Bond a vulnerable hero and somebody who went through amazing things and really, suffered, torture and loss and things like that, but persevered. He kept coming. And when President John Kennedy admitted that he read the Bond books, that sort of percolated in the American psyche. Salzman and Broccoli created the first film with Sean Connery, which was Dr. No. And one wonderful afternoon, I found myself in the Symphony Theater space on 96th Street and Broadway in New York City, sitting there watching James Bond for the first time in my life and being amazed by that character. I'd never read the books, but I was amazed by the character. And of course, that went on, it succeeded, and that went on to create a spy fever in the United States. And before we knew it, we had a bunch of different spy movies coming out. Some of them, British, many of them American. We wound up with The Man from U.N.C.L.E. on television. We wound up with a number of things, even one particular cop show, Burke's Law. They changed their lead character into quote-unquote a spy, so that the next season it was Amos Burke's secret agent. And then, of course, we had I Spy with Culp and Cosby. So it had a major influence, but, we're talking about the 1960s. We're talking many moons ago. And yet, for years, this film series has continued with numerous new actors playing that character. You went from Connery to Lazenby, from Lazenby to Moore, Roger Moore. You went from Moore to Timothy Dalton, and you went from him to Brosnan, and then Daniel Craig. And all through this experience, Bond had a following. There were some new people who discovered him. There are people who preferred one particular portrayal to another. But the overall series concept, this iconic character, continued through all these years. I have to say my favorites are Connery and Craig. Those have been my two favorite actors portraying this character. Now, you look at comics, same thing. Batman, easiest to work with. Created in 1930s, I believe it was 39, and he has changed and evolved his look. Give him a partner, a young kid running around in a bright yellow cape, so that the killers and the thugs go after the kid, and then Batman steps out of the shadows and wipes them out. You had the dark, brooding character who carried a gun in the very first issue or two, and then slowly it lightened up a bit, and like I said, then adding Robin, he came through, and then that went through the 40s and 50s, and then suddenly they add in Aliens in the 60s, and then the 70s, 80s, he starts getting socially conscious, and then by the 90s and into the 2000s, we're getting deep now into the psychological makeup of a character who, as a child, was traumatized by the murder of his mother and father right before his eyes. And so subsequently now he's messed up in the head and needs serious therapy while he's kicking butt and taking names. So again, iconic character from the 1930s all the way to 2015. And in films, yes, he was on radio. He was in the serials in the 1940s with Lewis Wilson and Bob Lowry playing, respectively. And then, the TV series with Adam West. And finally the movies, with Michael Keaton and Val Kilmer and all these other people. I mean, when you think about it, this character has endured all of this time in comics and in film, and always with an audience. And why? How has it managed to entertain and attract so many generations of fans? I think that, again, my belief about all this is really the character. It's creating a character, a myth that just holds together so strongly, that has such a core appeal factor, that it does transcend generations. And then ultimately you have to work with the creator, the writers, the artists. When you talk about James Bond, well, okay, Ian Fleming's created the books, but once it slipped into the film world, multiple people have worked on the screenplay. And yes, they always come back to certain core elements of Bond. And so those core elements have to be consistent. The things that attract the audience either as readers or as fans for the film. Then you have, just to compare books, you have Nero Wolfe, which was created and written originally by Rex Stout. And for years, people followed those novels religiously. And there were radio shows and TV shows and so forth. And then Stout died. And then others have taken up the pen. And some will say, well, it's not quite Stout's voice. It's not this, it's not that. But the series is still holding up. So once again, we go back to, how is that possible if the original creator is not still on it? And it's because of the strength and the core elements of the character, how well that character was created, how something about it rings true with every incarnation that has transpired over the generations. And it's an amazing thing when you think about it, that something endures that long. I was thinking about some of the comic strips like Peanut and Calvin and Hobbes. Charles Schultz, he passed away. And, the movie's out and there's all that. But the comic strips themselves are sort of, they have the feel that they've come to a close. Because Schultz's sensibility, his voice, his tone, it was him. The series was him, and he was making those statements, and he was sharing those feelings with the world, and they were his feelings or his philosophies, his beliefs, and it may be very hard for someone to flow with that. If they do, it'll become what it'll become. But that's interesting. Whereas Waterston, who created Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Waterston, he said no. He said no to animation. He said no to film. And when he reached the point where he didn't want to do the strip anymore, he said no to someone taking it over for him. He wanted that to remain his. It was his world, his voice, his philosophy, his feelings, his observations. At the beginning, straight through to the end, and it stops there. So, again, the series, the characters, Calvin and Hobbes and Charlie Brown and Lucy and all of them, still live within many of us very richly. We hold on to those thoughts. They bring memories, especially around Christmas time. People think about the Charlie Brown special, but they endure because of something, again, about the core elements of those characters, the very, very essence of those characters. So, again, as a writer, as a creator of my own characters, I know I work hard to try and endow them with elements that I think people can connect to. And yes, there's a portion of me that goes into them as well, especially with my character Blackjack, for instance. There's certain elements of my life or my philosophy, my beliefs, things I've seen that I've definitely put in there and hope that they resonate with the audience. When I work on Archie, I certainly look at all the elements that I remember from reading the books as a kid, the way I felt about them then, the things that I've learned as a professional in reading the books and looking at them and reading the Archie Bible on what to do and what not to do and listening to the editors. You factor all that in, and then you try and tell a good tale within the universe that is classic Archie. The Archie of the olden days. And even again, if you look at that, it started, I believe, it was 1941. And when you come forward over 70 years, you realize how many people have drawn it and written it. You realize that, again, we've brought a little bit of what we are to the strip or to the comic book. But ultimately, we're always trying to give you Archie, the core that is Archie Andrews and Jughead and Betty and Veronica and Reggie and all of them. So as a creator, you look at the work that's gone before you and how it's affected you as a reader or as a fan of the films. You think about what is it that pulls me in? What is it that I love about these characters, that makes me want to see them again and again and again? And you enjoy that as a person, but you also, as an artist, analyze it so that when you create your own, you come from someplace genuine and you try and endow those characters with enough truth or a sense of genuineness, if there is such a word, that your audiences will embrace it. And certainly when you're working on characters that belong to someone else, that were created by someone else, your job, your task, is to learn all you can about those characters, but then is also to say and really think about, what do I bring to the table that will make this story new and fresh, so it isn't a repetition of the stories that have done before, so that the audience will see those familiar characters. They will believe, yes, those are the characters I love or have learned to love or have come to enjoy, and that rings true. Oh, but look at this cool, new, interesting story. So you got to do your homework. You got to call on your imagination. Then you got to call on your experience, your life experience, and your knowledge of the world and people in order to create something that's lasting. Okay, that's my observation for now. Hope it's of some use to you, and see you next time.